guys. All right. Sorry, my baby just absolutely lost it. You know, that point of the night where it doesn't matter how civilized you are, you're done and you have no control over your emotions anymore. Too tired. That's where she's at. All right. So let's get started. That way we're not here all night because I know I have to take my quiz, and I'm sure plenty of you have to take your quiz too. So this is not going to be an hour-long study hall. I'm just going to go over some quick stuff that I feel like is going to be most important on this quiz after reviewing just a little bit ago my notes from reading the book. Let me look through here. Sorry. I often don't write verbatim what I've highlighted because sometimes what I highlight out of context, the sentence format just doesn't make sense outside of the paragraphs. So sometimes I just tweak it a little bit. Or as I'm typing it in, I realize I need just an example or to reiterate what they're kind of talking about. So, okay. So based off of the premise of this chapter, I think the key things in it are going to be knowing what an attitude is, how it's formed, what it says about us, and how it serves a critical function in how we interact with other people. I think it's going to be important to know the different measurement types, the self-reported measures, covert measures. I think in the self-reported measures, because it's got two different examples, the attitude scale and the bogus pipeline, those key terms, I think that's going to be pretty important. They might bring up the EEG and the EMG for covert measures, but I don't think it's going to be super huge. I just think you should have it in your notes ready to go to remind you of examples of covert measures. Oh yeah, the fMRI is in that section too. I do think it's important to know what the implicit association test is, the IAT. They talked ad nauseum about it. I've been using that word a lot over the past week, but they've been using it a lot. So knowing how it pertains to implicit attitude, how the test is run, I think is going to be important on this quiz. Even if you don't get that question, I have a distinct feeling he's going to pick at least a couple of these. If he's picking at all, I'm not sure. That's not something he's really relayed about how he chooses the questions out of the test bank that he has. But I do think that's a key one that at least Cengage is going to have in their laundry list of questions. I think Pavlov is going to be huge in how attitudes are formed. I think that LaPierre study in the links between attitude and behavior are going to be pretty important. Knowing what contexts attitudes are formed, strengths of attitudes, and cultural context might be key too. And And then the whole persuasion section. God, the whole persuasion section, that's huge. We talked about that for days. You need to know the difference between central route and peripheral route. I'm not even guessing that anymore. Even if you don't need to, if you don't get by some weird chance a question about central route or peripheral route persuasion, you're going to need to know it for the test. And even if you don't need to know it for the test, you're going to need to know it for any kind of career in psychology. So know the difference succinctly. Know the technical definition of elaboration in the context of the central route. God, I hope that quote from Adolf Hitler is not going to be important, because that just hurts my soul to even know that that's one of the quoted parts of this book. I mean, it's, yeah, that's all I want to say about that. I think knowing that people often use simple-minded heuristics, rules of thumbs, when it comes to the peripheral route is going to be key. And how people choose those different routes, what affects how you choose. So when they talk about sources, how credible a source is, how competent, how trustworthy, how self-validation hypothesis affects how we see someone as competent, self-interest rules, whether someone is likable, trust, if you trust that they're not trying to just change your opinion, that they're inadvertently, they're not overtly trying. You don't get that sense from them. Yeah, likability, being based on similarity and physical attractiveness, I think is key. Knowing that there's more involved in what you say, how you say, who you are, where those things are important and where they're not, is going to be critical. So that whole section about whether the recipient is pretty involved. The sleeper effect, I'm not sure the sleeper effect is going to be on here. I think that was a little obscure, but at least know the definition. Yeah, informational strategies, choosing based on your audience. I mean, God, we've heard that so many times in speech class, in writing class. Know who you're talking to. If you're writing a letter to a a prospective grad school that you want to get into, you are not going to talk to them the same way that you talk to your friends. You're going to choose your words carefully. You're going to choose your subject matter and the letter or whatever differently. You can get away with more or less depending on which group that you're talking to. So knowing the strategies with which people present messages, I think is going to be important for this test. Regency primacy might come up. He has a, no. I have noticed that every quiz has had some obscure things in it. And while regency and primacy effect aren't obscure, knowing the difference between them for specifically this, I think might be pretty important. The message discrepancy section of persuasion is probably gonna come up too. And I don't feel like I did a very good job over the past couple of days talking about where one is, I don't think I did a good job of relaying the differences between the two. I think it was really wordy, really technical in terms, and a little bit disconnected from perception and how we grasp information. So that one might be a little heady. You might want to read over it just to get a sense of it at least once more before you actually take the quiz. I do like the section about appeals to emotion, fear, and positive emotions. That you may not need to verbatim memorize that section, but I would reread your notes on that pretty critically, so that it's fresh in your mind. I'm not sure subliminal will come up. If it does, it's going to be a one-off sentence, maybe a question. I don't think you'll get more than a question on your quiz, and certainly not on the exam. Knowing your audience, we kind of talked about that earlier, but yeah, knowing your audience will probably be pretty important. A lot of people have reported getting some questions about culture. So know all the culture sections of each one as well. Not like by heart, but at least read it if you haven't already, or go over your notes. So we talked about cultural influences on cognitive dissonance. We talked about culture and persuasion. We talked about culture and attitudes. Just make sure that you're fresh on those. And then the whole cognitive, yeah. I'm not sure inoculation hypothesis actually might be on here. Like, I get it. Actually, no, it might. They used up almost an entire page. I would recommend that you guys look over table 6.3. In my book, it's on page 245, but the strategies for resisting persuasion, I think, are pretty important to jot down. And I think that, combined with knowing the inoculation hypothesis, pretty succinctly sums up forewarning and resistance, that whole section. Everybody knows how I feel about the role-playing section, so I'm not going to go over it. Know the difference between the classical version and the new look to cognitive dissonance theory. Yeah, I think that's the shortest and simplest way of putting it. Know the difference between the two. I would also say that you probably need to reread and memorize your notes on the difference between self-perception theory, impression management theory, and self-esteem theories as the alternative routes to self-persuasion. I think there might be a single question on ethical dissonance. So just know all the terms in there. Remember the terms that weren't actually key terms, but that are defined in that section. So remember that, the behavioral ethics definition, the ethical dissonance, know the difference between anticipation and experience, in coping with self-serving justification. Yeah, I would. Oh, and moral licensing. Yes, I have a feeling those terms are going to be pretty key. And then again, the cultural influence. I already said that. Yeah, so I think another thing that would be really good is for everybody to read this last part, the review section, where they say the key points, because sometimes there's a question right off of it. I know I had one right off of it, and later I was like, where did they talk about that? And then I looked it up, and here it is. So now for every quiz, I at least read it over so that I can be like, where did I know I read it somewhere. Okay, so question or key point 1 is an attitude is an evaluative, either positive or negative reaction to a person, place, issue, or object. That's a definition right there. Know that researchers typically measure attitudes through self-report, as in public opinion surveys, or by covert measures of a person's behavior, most notably using the IAT, the implicit association test. I'm telling you, I have a feeling at least one question on the IAT for everybody. At least I think so. All right, research shows that individuals may be genetically predisposed to hold certain attitudes, but that our attitudes are also shaped by our personal experiences, observations, and associations. So they're not throwing out the potential for genetic components in people's attitudes, but we get them also pretty heavily from personal experiences, observations, and associations. Then the fourth one, the most common approach to changing attitudes, as seen in marketing, politics, advertising, and religion, is through the presentation of persuasive communication. There are 2 pathways by which people are persuaded by a communication, either the central route, people thinking critically about the strength and quality of arguments, or the peripheral route, people are influenced by surface cues, such as how the speaker looks or their reputation. Number 6 says, research shows people are more likely to change their attitudes in response to a speaker who is likable and credible by arguments that are well developed and not too extreme, when motivated by fear, or when relaxed by positive emotions. 7, to be effective. Yeah, I think that one, I'm going to highlight that because that feels like it's going to be a straight up question. I feel it. Feel it in my nuggets. If anybody can tell me what movie that's from, I mean, that's worth all the brownie points right there. Anyway, okay. Their 7th point that they want you to remember from chapter 6 is, to be effective, persuasive messages should present arguments that appeal to the individual and cultural values of its audience members. The 8th is that, according to cognitive dissonance theory, people often come to change their attitudes in order to justify their own actions, as when they lie for profit or waste effort on something that proves disappointing, or make a difficult decision that they then start to regret. Yeah, that goes into the whole cognitive dissonance theory. So yeah, I'm going to highlight that one too. Key points, man. Read it. It's worth it. All right, for more than 50 years, social psychologists have debated how and why cognitive dissonance leads people to change their attitudes. For example, whether the change represents a logical inference or a motivation to protect one's own self-esteem. I gotta stop highlighting the whole damn book. Okay, and the last key point they want you to know is, it now appears that people all over the world will try to reduce dissonance when it arises, but that the conditions that trigger it are influenced by cultural factors. They've also got all the key terms listed back here and the pages that they're on. But like I said, there are a lot in here. definitions of things that are either italicized or just not highlighted or indicated at all other than it being defined in the text. And I have a feeling that it might come up. So look over these key terms by all means, but also look over those key terms from having read through the book. And then they've got a quick common sense test on the back. Researchers can tell if someone has a positive or negative attitude by measuring physiological arousal. False. Measures of arousal can reveal how intensely someone feels, but not whether the person's attitude is positive or negative. Okay, so that's an example. There are 4 others. I would look over these questions as well, because they give you all the answers right here and why. So if there's anything in the book that you don't understand or can't put succinctly, like I've been saying all night, I'm sorry, I've got these buzzwords in my mouth and I gotta get rid of them. But if you cannot summarize, if you can't summarize the general concepts of the chapter, these key terms are doing a great job for me, at least. And these example questions can come in pretty handy. So I'm going to go study without further ado. Good luck, guys. I think I'm only going to give it maybe another 20 minutes. I'm going to take a break real fast. Then I'm going to study a little bit more, take a break, and then actually do the quiz. I'll let you guys know how I do. I hope you guys do well too. I hope, having seen that you can read through just a little bit at a time and still make it to before doing the chapter quiz in a reasonable amount. And hopefully this has helped you guys. Thanks for listening this long. And studying with me. If you guys have any other questions, you know where to find me. Bye.